Is something really different about Jungkook? And why can everyone feel it but no one can explain it? What changed? When did it begin? And what truth hides behind this quiet shift? Stay until the end and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as we explore a story filled with emotion, mystery, and a difference that refuses to be ignored. What if the change isn't something you can see clearly, but something you can't stop feeling? What if it's not in the obvious moments but in the quiet spaces between them? And what if the reason everyone is talking about it is not because they understand it, but because they don't? Before you scroll away, pause for a second and ask yourself, did you notice it too? That subtle shift, that quiet difference in the way Jungkook carries himself now. It's not something loud, not something dramatic, but once you feel it, it lingers. It stays in your mind like a question that refuses to disappear. At first, it didn't seem like anything had changed. Everything looked familiar. The performances were still strong, the presence still powerful, the connection still there. There was no announcement, no moment that clearly marked a turning point. But beneath that familiarity, something else was forming. Something quiet, something gradual, something that didn't need to be seen to be real. It started in fragments, a look that seemed deeper than before, a pause that felt heavier, a presence that carried a different kind of energy, more grounded, yet more distant at the same time. These weren't changes that demanded attention, but they invited it in a way that felt almost impossible to ignore. And then slowly people began to notice. Not all at once, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in small scattered observations. Comment questioning a feeling, a thought shared without certainty, a growing sense that something wasn't exactly the same. And as those small moments connected, something bigger began to form. A shared realization. Something is different. But what? That question sits at the center of everything, unanswered yet impossible to dismiss. Because the difference isn't something you can point to. It doesn't exist in a single action or a clear change in behavior. It exists in the way everything feels slightly altered, as if something beneath the surface has shifted, quietly influencing everything else. And that makes it both powerful and difficult to explain. There is a kind of familiarity that builds over time when someone is constantly seen. Patterns become recognizable, energy becomes predictable, presence becomes something almost instinctively understood. And when that familiarity changes, even in the smallest way, it creates a feeling that stands out immediately. For Jungkook, that familiarity has always been strong. His presence carries a distinct energy, focused, expressive, deeply connected. It is something that has remained consistent even as everything else evolves. But now there is something added to that energy, something that wasn't as visible before. A quiet depth, a subtle shift, a layer that changes how everything else is perceived. And that is what people are feeling. Not a loss, not a replacement, but an addition that creates a different kind of presence. More complex, more reflective, more difficult to define. This kind of change does not happen without reason. It is shaped by time, by experience, by moments that leave an impact, even if they are never shared. It is influenced by the balance between being seen and being understood, between expectation and identity, between the external world and internal reality. And in a life as visible as Jungkook's, that balance is never static. It shifts. It evolves. It requires constant adjustment. There is also the reality of being constantly observed. Every movement noticed. Every expression interpreted. Every silence questioned. Over time, this creates a unique kind of pressure. Not always visible, but always present. And within that pressure, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, until one day the difference becomes impossible to ignore. And that is where the story is now. People are not just noticing, they are feeling. And feeling creates a different kind of understanding. It is not based on facts or explanations, but on perception, on emotional recognition, on the sense that something real is happening even if it cannot be fully described. This is why the conversation continues to grow, because the more people try to explain it, the more they realize how difficult it is. Words fall short. Descriptions feel incomplete. Every explanation captures only a part of something much larger. And yet, the feeling remains consistent. That is what makes it real. Because consistency in feeling, even without clarity, suggests that something genuine is being perceived. Not imagined, not exaggerated, but sensed. There is also an emotional complexity to this moment that cannot be ignored. Because noticing change in someone you feel connected to is not a neutral experience. It carries meaning. It creates curiosity, but also reflection. It brings a sense of closeness, but also a recognition of distance. Closeness because the ability to notice subtle differences comes from familiarity. Distance because the reason behind those differences remains unknown. And that combination creates a tension that is both intriguing and meaningful. It reminds us that connection does not always come with full understanding. That presence does not always mean access. That what we see is only part of what exists. As time continues, more people will notice. More perspectives will emerge. More interpretations will take shape. But the core of the story will remain the same. Something is different, and no one can fully explain why. But maybe that is not something that needs to be solved. Maybe it is something that needs to be accepted. Because not all change is meant to be clearly defined. Some changes are meant to be experienced, to be felt, to exist without explanation. And perhaps that is what makes this moment so powerful. Not because it gives answers, but because it creates questions. Not because it explains everything, but because it reveals that not everything can be explained. So if you have felt that difference, if you have noticed that subtle shift even without understanding it, then you are already part of this story. Not as someone who knows the truth, but as someone who has recognized that something is happening. And sometimes that recognition is enough. So don't let the feeling stop here. Share what you think. Leave your perspective. Be part of the conversation. Because sometimes the most important stories are not the ones that are clearly told, but the ones that everyone can feel, even when no one can fully explain them. And as that shared feeling continues to echo across conversations, timelines, and quiet reflections, something even more compelling begins to take shape. Not just awareness, but a kind of collective sensitivity. People are no longer just noticing. They are tuning in more carefully to every nuance, every subtle expression from Jungkook, as if trying to understand something that exists just beneath the surface. This is where perception becomes almost instinctive, because when something cannot be explained logically, it often begins to be understood emotionally. Fans are not analyzing data or searching for definitive proof. They are responding to a feeling that keeps repeating itself, consistently, across different moments. And repetition creates belief. Not certainty, but belief. And belief in this context is powerful enough to keep the conversation alive.